On this week's episode of the Goldilocks Zone, we're talking about the Sunday Funnies, your favorite newspaper comic strips, getting answers to the tough questions like, was Hagar the Horrible really that horrible? Why were those Family Circus kids so darn creepy? And the ultimate question, who hated Mondays more, Garfield or Dilbert? Stick around, because we're going to get to all of your favorites coming up on the Goldilocks Zone. You're entering the Goldilocks Zone, episode number 19, recorded July 23rd, 2015. Comic strips and the Sunday Funnies. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Goldilocks Zone. I'm Sean Jennings, and I am joined, as always, by the funny man himself, Mr. Senior Dr. Reverend Esquire the Third, Mr. Matt Mariani.
How are we doing, Sean? I hate Mondays.
I agree, but you want some lasagna, right? I mean, and you hate
always
Odie,
want some lasagna and hanging out with my pal Odie.
I like to think I would be the real-life version of John Arbuckle.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty much the real-life version of Odie, so...
Now we're
I
just
guess
missing
that
our
fits.
Garfield.
We just need a Garfield.
Yeah,
so
we're pretty close.
we're on the lookout.
Definitely. Well, thank you all for joining us on the Goldilocks Zone. We appreciate you being here. We've got an exciting show for you this week. Before we get to that, I'll politely remind everybody where you can get the show. GoldilocksShow.com is the website, and on SoundCloud is the best place, I think, to listen to the audio at SoundCloud.com/GoldilocksZone, and we're also on every platform you can imagine. YouTube, on Twitter, at Goldilocks Show, on Facebook, Goldilocks Show. It's pretty much Goldilocks Show everywhere. And, of course, available to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Overcast, Pocket Cast, basically anywhere you can get podcasts, we're there as well. So be sure to subscribe and check us out. We do this show hopefully weekly, sometimes sporadically, but we always hopefully have good stuff for you, the fans out there. And Matt, I am excited for this week's topic. We've critiqued a lot of media in the past. We've done movies, we've done television, we've done books, we've done it all. But one we've never gotten to is a classic. An old print form, the comic strip. Now this isn't your X-Men's, although they had a comic strip. It's not your Spider-Man's, who also had a comic strip. Maybe we should think of an example who was only a comic book. It's not comic books, right?
It's not your Batman.
It's not your Batman. I think Superman had a comic strip. Yeah. A lot of those guys at one point or another had a comic strip. It's not your... Okay, maybe we should say what it is. It is those classic Sunday newspaper strips. Now, not political cartoons. We're talking about the funny stuff, usually syndicated, right? These are the strips that ran across the country every single week, every Sunday you would find in your newspaper. And we're going to talk about them and do our usual sort of Goldilocks Zone nujitsu on giving our thoughts and opinions on them. And I'm certainly excited, Matt. Is there a particular strip you would like to start with this week?
Well, I think to start, we should talk about a classic that I happen to really like to read. Actually, I wanted to do a little brief introduction. A lot of these comics we're going to be talking about on the show today are some that I remember fondly from my youth. So I remember sitting around reading the Sunday paper and looking at these comics, and it's a simple joy that I think a lot of the youth of today are sadly missing out on. It's kind of been replaced by, the technology. Now kids can look on, I don't know, any funny junk. I remember there was funnyjunk.com was a website the kids like. It's funny. They go on the Twitter and the MySpace, and they're kind of occupied with their own friends doing funny things or whatever they're occupied with, which is fine. It's just different. I remember growing up reading these comics and laughing at them every week. So reliving some of that enjoyment is going to be it's going to be a treat today.
Very nostalgic. I agree.
Indeed. That being said, I think that the comic book, or the comic strip that I would like to start out with this week is an all-time classic. I mean, I guess we probably could have picked a funnier one to start out with, but I'm gonna pick a traditional classic, and I think you know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
Family Circle.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Family Circle. Now,
Family Circle.
what's interesting to me is that the first comic strip you picked isn't a strip. It's a single panel.
That's true. I guess it depends on how you define strip.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I mean, it was syndicated. It came out every
You're
week.
right.
It just wasn't like that traditional. I get what you're
It's
saying.
not
It wasn't like
literally
that.
a strip, but it is
There was no
considered a
linear
comic strip.
story.
Exactly. It was a single
It's
frame.
more like like an image with a caption
It's almost like a political
kind
cartoon
of
without the
thing.
politics.
Yeah,
'Cause it's
you could
that
say
similar
that. It was more
style.
about values or
It was
contemporary
about family.
things.
Of
I
course,
think it started to get a little cynical toward the end. I mean, I guess not the end because it's still being printed, but toward like when like it was still like widely relevant. Like when I used to read it, toward the end of that time, it got a little cynical about like I guess where where we as a society were headed.
yeah, yeah.
Some panels, and I think speaking to that cynicism, I wanted to share a little a fun little jab I found on Family Circle. So you know the Family Circle has like the traditional like image, and then it'll say a caption about that image or
Mm-hmm.
some kind of there's one. Yeah. So see, it would always have like a lot of like something for the kids, something for the adults as well. So this site I found is called um, it's called Anisha with Family Circus or Nishi with Family Circus. So are you familiar with the German philosopher Nietzsche at
Sadly,
all?
I am.
Yes. He's he was a late 19th century, early 20th century German philosopher who had this like, you know, early existentialist look on humanity. And I found this place on the web zone where you can go, and they actually they randomly generate yes they randomly generate pictures of actual pictures from the Family Circus comic with quotes from the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah, it's that was always one of my favorite things about Family Circus was it it could be taken the wrong way to an extreme degree, which was always a lot of fun.
Oh,
Especially because the images are really without the caption they're nonsense. They really
yes.
are.
And that's what this. I think that's what this website generator plays on that.
Yeah, it's fun. You can Google it and find it.
Yeah, just yeah, Family Circus, Friedrich Nietzsche quotes. I always thought it was pronounced Nisha. I guess that's like seemed to me like the German pronunciation, but everybody says Nishi.
I wouldn't even begin to guess how to
Yeah,
pronounce that.
I don't know. Yeah, so that's Family Circus.
And I've also seen similar things where they put really raunchy captions under it, which I won't share here on the show.
Ah.
But suffice to say, you can Google them, and they're quite funny.
Okay.
But Family Circus, maybe a little background, created by Bill Keane and now run by his son Jeff, began in February 29th, 1960, and according to Wikipedia, is the most widely syndicated cartoon panel in the world. Now, of course, they call it here a panel, so it's probably the most syndicated single-panel comic. And books containing the comic strips have sold over 13 million copies worldwide. Fun fact, it takes place in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh, I didn't know it had a setting. It didn't really need to have a setting.
Mm-hmm.
But all right.
Yeah, I mean, I
Wait.
guess technically it does. Every story has some kind of setting.
There are correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I remembered there being like snow in some of the cartoons.
Yeah, there are.
I don't think it snows in Scottsdale, Arizona. That's like it's a really arid place to be.
It says here, Sometimes the family is depicted enjoying snow at their home in the strip, whereas Scottsdale gets very little snow. Bill Keane commented that he took scenes from his boyhood in Pennsylvania and added them to the strip. So
Oh,
little
okay. I'm
continuum.
glad somebody else had that same thought.
I wouldn't have put two
Wow.
and two together. I've never thought
Okay,
about Family
okay.
Circus for this long a period of
I never
time.
even I had no idea they even had a setting, but very
Thank you,
good.
Wikipedia. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, when you think about, oh my God, they might be making a feature film about it.
What?
That'd be awful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. No,
I'd go see it.
I think Family Circus is interesting because, unlike most comic strips I can think of, they shied away from anything remotely controversial for the most
Yeah.
part. Nothing political, nothing economic, and the art style is very simple. There's no sort of action really. It's very different from a lot of other comic strips, I think, and it's surprising to me that it is still in print because you would think a comic like that wouldn't apply to culture today.
Right.
That
That's
it wouldn't be
why.
as applicable.
Yeah. That's why when I misspoke earlier when I said toward the end, I thought I was under the impression that the thing had run its course. But I mean, it is still around today.
Yeah.
Still around every week. You can find it in your Sunday newspaper.
But to be fair, I think perhaps the lack of political or economic, maybe the simple nature lends itself to sticking around for a long period of time.
Yeah.
There's
That
almost
one
like
panel.
Norman Rockwell. It's kind of like a very
Yeah.
timeless quality to it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. It's very Rockwell-esque.
Very
Yeah.
very idealized picture of sort of the American family. The biggest problem I had with Family Circus is that I don't think it's funny.
No.
It's sometimes
I think
clever.
it's witty. Yeah.
Yeah, and interesting.
Clever, witty. It makes you smirk a bit, but definitely not laugh.
And there is a very distinct lack of story. Now, I know there's some comic
Yeah.
strips that don't carry over week to week, but at least there is a bold presented premise that usually the humor is based around. This is just a family making observations about the most boring life you could imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of be like I guess it'd just be like The Simpsons if you just beat all the humor out of it.
Yeah,
Because Simpsons is
exactly.
it's very observational, but
It's like
also
you
funny.
castrated The Simpsons,
Yes,
and you get
yeah.
Family Circus.
That's
I mean,
right.
you have to remember the kids in here are Billy, Dolly, Jeffy, and PJ. So, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, the comic definitely it lends itself to an older generation for sure. It's not like our generation's comic. It's like probably our dad's generation's comic.
But I think that's why it's almost funnier today, because it seems almost like a parody. It seems almost ridiculous. Like it's so far out of normal. You're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever read. Like who talks like this? And then you get parodies like Nietzsche and raunchy stuff and whatever. But
I wonder if the creators of the comic feel that same way.
I think that's a good question. I'd be
Like
curious.
I wonder if they know that their comic is like the ultra like ultimate poster board for like wholesomeness in terms of comic strips, especially now since being able to publish comics on the web. You can say and draw pretty much anything, and you can. I mean, if you research any comic strips, a lot of the stuff out there is a lot. People get away with a lot in comic strips. I'll just have to say.
They sure do.
And but yeah, through it all, Family Circus is still that bastion of wholesomeness.
Yeah.
And kind of like middle America, 1950s, purity.
Yeah, there's a place for it. I think there's definitely a place for it. I'm surprised it's still as... I thought this would have gotten much smaller over the years. Not that it would have gone away, but I think it would have gotten a little more niche, a little more sort of cult.
Yeah.
And not as continuing to run in nationally and internationally, but...
Yeah. Yeah, it's still pretty contemporary. It stays with a lot of trends.
Yeah.
Mostly now it's just it gets kind of gripey though. If you read it enough, it's almost like they're complaining about kids on their cell phones again. Look at that. Oh, they're complaining
Yeah.
about smartphones now. It's like
Yeah.
that's why I said earlier it's kind of like it's almost like listening to your grandpa rant about kids today.
It's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Wow. So the Family Circus. There you go.
Family Circus.
Get it in a newspaper near you.
What do we got next,
What do
Sean?
we got next, Matt? I would like to talk about the greatest businessman of all time, a man who revolutionized management
Trump.
synergy. No, I'm talking about Dilbert.
Dilbert. Of
Dilbert.
Course. Vote Dilbert.
Of course. The comic strip illustrated by Scott Adams, published first in 1989, and still running to this day. Of course, featuring the main character of Dilbert as the white-collar sort of office worker and all the shenanigans that go on in his office. Dilbert appears online and in 2,000 newspapers worldwide in 65 countries and in 25 languages.
Wow.
The strip has spawned several books, an animated television series, a video game, and hundreds of merchandise items, says Wikipedia.
There's a Dilbert video game?
According to Wikipedia, let's
hold the phone. I need to get my hands on this Dilbert video.
It seems like it would lend itself to a video game.
What do you do? You run around and collect TPS reports?
Yeah. I'd buy that.
Yeah, all right. I'd still probably play it, sure. The Dilbert simulator.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So, the reason I like Dilbert, and I like Dilbert, I'm actually a fan, is because I think you could relate it a lot to Family Circus in that it's taking a stereotype to an extreme.
Yeah.
And it's very focused on it's very one note in terms of the types of jokes it tells. What I like about Dilbert is it tells those jokes exceptionally well. And sometimes they're very pointed and sometimes they're very exaggerated. Either way, I work in an office. It's not the most corporate, boring office ever, but I do believe, and even before I worked in an office, I just felt that the jokes Dilbert told really did speak to a specific audience and really nailed that audience. I feel like it really nailed what office workers felt and told the stories, and there's a reason why Dilbert's posted in every cubicle across America. I just thought it's a simple comic, but I just think it's exceptionally well written. I think it's very funny, and I'm just a fan in general of Dilbert. I don't know, Matt, what your thoughts are.
See, when I was reading comics growing up on Sundays, I think that I usually skipped the Dilbert.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that I haven't. I now as an adult I've read Dilbert, and I understand it better. And I think that's the problem with Dilbert is some of the comics. This is what it really depends on. Like some of the comics were very universal and like funny and relatable at the same time. Some of them were very niche though.
Yeah.
Some of them were like you have to work in an office to get this joke, or you have to be like a white collar guy to get the joke. And but some of them were like technical in that regard. Not all of them. I think for the majority, even on those technical ones, for the majority, they were like grin worthy, chuckle worthy. They were pretty good. Dilbert as a character is a very interesting concept because he is the everyman. Like there are some depictions across all media of like what the everyman is, but Dilbert he's the absolute pinpointed definition of average in every single way. He's that typical white male demographic, corporate, mid-30s. Like that's just his thing, and you don't really see a lot of reflection of his personality outside of work. He's a workaholic, kind of. Not really. I guess he's a working guy. He doesn't work too hard. He doesn't work too little. Well,
and he doesn't, it's not that he doesn't want to work. It's just he wants to do a good job and no one around him will let him. which I think is it's a very relatable struggle. Like, we all want to do
Yeah.
good in our jobs. It's really a lot of other
Yeah.
things that impact
There are
how
a lot
that's
of
done.
other factors. Yeah.
I think, like you said, I do agree that sometimes Dilbert can get a little too smart for its own good and too specific for its own good. And I think that speaks to Scott Adams. If you've ever heard him speak or read any of the things he's written outside of Dilbert, he's an incredibly smart guy. Not that I'm saying most comic strip authors are dumb, but I think he is exceptionally smart for what he does. And I think that sometimes comes across in some of the more out there strips he writes. But oh crap, I forgot what I had another really good point and now I can't remember what it was. Oh, so the other point I was going to say is, it's interesting that Dilbert launched in 1989, which I think if Dilbert had come out in the 60s or the 70s, like a lot of the comics we're going to talk about, I feel like it would have never worked, right? This was a comic for its era. This is a comic in the 90s, the rise of the tech company and the corporate
Reagan
office.
presidency.
The Reagan leading into Clinton and the boom in the economy.
.com boom, yeah.
And then the eventual collapse of that and the sort of building up but then breaking down of the corporate worker. This was a comic really of its time. And I think it's still relevant somewhat today. But I think at the time at which it launched, it is such a perfect encapsulation of what was going on and how people were feeling. And I think that's rare in comics. I think there's only a few that have done it. You look at some of these comics without their with sort of thing, maybe compared to like a Beetle Bailey, right? Where where Dilbert's in an office, they're in the army, right? And that's their thing. And they make jokes about being in the army, but their jokes are very surface level, and I don't think they really speak to, not like MASH or something where it really speaks to being what it's like to be in the military. I feel like Dilbert is not only funny, but actually says something, and actually there's something underneath it. It's not just a funny strip in a paper. It's a feeling, an emotion, and represents what people actually think.
Yeah, Dilbert's definitely one of those, you don't expect it at first, but it's one of those ones that you could have a really in-depth conversation about just one panel, or just one strip. You can really get into the deep-seated philosophy behind it. And a lot of comics some comics you can do it with, but a lot of others you can't. Like a lot of others, it's just you get what you get, like you said with Beetle Bailey, and other comics out there. But no, Dilbert's one of those ones where you could have a really good, informed conversation about quality of work environment, life in general, really. Our interactions with each other as human beings, there's a lot of existentialist thoughts in Dilbert.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend, if you've never seen the animated series they did back in '99. It ran for 2 seasons, Golden Globe winning show. It's actually surprisingly good for a TV show adapted from a comic strip. And I would be interested to. I'd encourage people to see it because I think it does speak to the fact that this isn't just like, set up punchline joke, and they just hit you with jokes every week. It's not really about that. It's about creating something bigger. So cool. That is
Dilbert's pretty cool.
I rep for Dilbert.
Still want to check out that video game.
Check out Dilbert the video game. It reminds me, what is the Stanley Parable? Have you ever played the Stanley Parable?
No.
If you have a chance, look that up. And I feel like if that were branded Dilbert, I feel like it would be spot on. Matt, do you have another strip you'd like to discuss?
All right. So we just mentioned it in the previous conversation. You want to talk about Beetle Bailey, or we kind of have already said pretty much everything?
We can talk about Beetle Bailey, because Beetle Bailey to me is actually an interesting story. I don't know if you're familiar with the origins of Beetle Bailey.
No, I am not familiar. Please reveal them to me. So
Beetle Bailey began in 1950. Believe it or not, it is among the oldest comic strips still being produced by their original creator. But Beetle originally was a college student at a university, and it was modeled after the creator's fraternity brothers. And it was never supposed to be about the military. And in the first year that the comic ran, it was it wasn't really catching on with readers. People, it was kind of flat, and so they enlisted him. Believe it or not, and they drafted him into the army, and Beetle Bailey became
Was he
a military.
enlisted in a comic? Like, is there a comic strip where he is drafted, or signs up for the military?
That's a good question.
He says, "You know what? Like, I'm sick of all this academic crap. I'm gonna pick up my rifle, head out to boot camp." Is there a comic strip that says that?
I couldn't tell you.
Huh.
I couldn't.
Or is it just like a seamless thing where they were like one minute he's in the fraternity, next
and they just never explain it?
Okay. Well, I can understand. I can totally understand why it fell on deaf ears. If it was published in the 1950s and it's about a fraternity, it's an extremely limited audience. Yep. At that point.
And
I
think military humor had a pretty potential audience there. Yeah.
Right. You had the Korean War. I mean, when it was published, you said it was in what, 55? You said.
So in
58.
51 was the year they first enlisted
51.
in the military. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that was the height of the Korean War. So
yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely has a place because it was still the time when publications were like trying to appeal to people to join the military, to become active in campaigning for the military. It was still like a very pro-military environment. You didn't hit the Vietnam era where it became, there was a huge backlash, especially from the academic world, about war and that kind of thing. So that's really another comic I think that was actually sort of not right for its time, and then it adjusted itself to be right.
Which is rare. It's very rare that happens.
Yeah, right. It sort of like just shifted at the right moment and caught on. So now I'm curious, during the 60s and 70s, what was the nature of the, like, I know Beetle Bailey rarely ever gets political. Mm-hmm. It's another one that doesn't really, involve itself with politics, just more like typical military life. But I wonder if was there anything about mentioning like the Vietnam War in Beetle Bailey?
Not according to the Wikipedia page. There are, I'm sure there's
kind of just stayed true to themselves.
Yeah, I'm sure there's whole things about the history of Beetle Bailey that I'm just not familiar with. But as far as I can tell, no, it's pretty much been the same all these years. Again, kind of like some of these comics that have a premise and they just like Family Circle, where it's just Family Circus. I always call it Family Circle. It actually started, by the way, as Family Circle and became Family Circus later. But where it's kind of premise, and then we just make jokes about the premise, regardless of what's going on outside the comic. I don't know, and that was one of the reasons, to be honest, I found Beetle Bailey funny on a extremely light level. It was never one I looked forward to reading. I would just glance over and move on, simply because the premise was okay, but it just seemed like a comic that was always stuck in that 50s, 60s mindset, with kind of like Family Circle, where the premise has just been explored to death and the jokes are just inconsequential and don't really mean anything.
Yeah, it's hard to stay active for that many years and not repeat yourself or recycle old themes.
It's very much those like yikes type jokes where it's a character falls off a cliff at the end and you chuckle because the other character got the better of them.
It was all very one dimensional.
It's very light. And that's fine.
Light stuff.
But
the origins is interesting.
I would like to see what bothers me about this is, like, I compare it to like a MASH, which is that sort of army humor, which was done so well on that show. I think that is like a comic strip where you used as a platform to tell jokes, but also to say smart things about the state of our military culture. Could be really interesting. Beetle Bailey is by no means that strip. It's just not.
And it had a platform.
It did, and
it had a platform.
It still does. But
it never really, even when talking about like regular military things, it could have been anywhere. Like it wasn't so specific. Like they could have been still in a fraternity, and the comic really wouldn't have changed all that
Yeah.
much.
And
You know, like
maybe that's why the humor's like that. I mean, if you can just take a bunch of comic characters and just upend them and move them, what does that really say about, if you took Dilbert and put him in,
in a battlefield.
in a battlefield, that you couldn't do that. It wouldn't make any sense.
Oh, it'd be absurd.
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That says a lot about Dilbert, that he's an established character with an established universe.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think hell, Beetle Bailey is stationed at Camp Swampy, and his sergeant is Sergeant Snorkel. I mean,
at this point, like, who are you writing for?
It's a gag comic strip, is what it is.
Yeah.
It's not about jokes; it's about gags, and whatever. There's a place for that. I'll scan through it, but by no means would I consider it a classic or great. It
was really never really one of my favorites.
It's more for chuckles than it is for anything else. Although it is amazing that the same guy, Mort Walker, is writing the scripts today.
It's
who
the
started
same guy?
it in 1950.
That's pretty remarkable.
Isn't that remarkable? Maybe that's why it's the same stuff.
Yeah,
it's the same
probably.
Guy.
He's probably just writing about things he knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the next comic we talk about should be a good one, because I think the ones we've talked about, I mean, with the exception of Dilbert.
Well, we've kind of altered. We did Family Circle, but then
Circle and Family Circus and Beetle
and
Bailey.
Not so great. Dilbert, and what good
similar.
one are we going to talk about?
Let's talk about the classic, the king, the almost undisputed champion of the comic strip world, universe, planet. Let's talk about my boy Garfield.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's get it. Let's talk about that orange cat.
I have a feeling that people may disagree with you using
champion of the comic universe.
Yeah, because I think I could make an argument for other
Charlie
comics.
Brown.
Yeah, the Peanuts I think might
Peanuts
supersede
are up there.
For my money, Garfield is unequivocally up there. And if an alien came to Earth and asked me to present an example of a comic strip to them, they have never seen a comic strip before, I would probably show them Garfield.
Yeah.
Because it is
the
quintessential comic strip. Maybe not the best or the funniest, but I think it does such a great job of encapsulating what is a comic strip. How do you tell jokes across several panels? How do you establish characters with sort of set personalities who play off one another?
They even had some recurring storylines.
And they have recurring storylines. And it's something, hell, we all know what it is, even today. So I think that's interesting. So, of course, Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, started it in 1978. Today it's syndicated in roughly 2,500 newspapers and journals, and at one point held the Guinness World Record for being the most widely syndicated comic strip, though it doesn't hold that anymore. Fun fact, Garfield is set in Muncie, Indiana, home of Jim Davis. Garfield has spawned merchandise earning nearly $1 billion annually, including several full-length theatrical live-action CGI film releases as well.
Wow.
Yes, so of course
Garfield.
the notable character of Garfield and of course John Arbuckle and Odie. A little history for you. Let's see. Garfield originally consisted of 4 characters, of course. Garfield, James A. Garfield Davis, who was a large, cantankerous man, and John Arbuckle, who became John Arbuckle, and of course Odie as well. There's a whole history to Garfield, which was not super familiar with, because apparently things have changed. But I'll show you. Actually, there's this really great thing on Wikipedia. I'll put on the screen how the comic has changed over the years. And how the look has changed of the characters.
Yeah, it seems like John's head has gotten a lot less round, or maybe his hair got longer.
I think his face got bigger.
His face got bigger. Okay, yeah, I see that. I see that now. His head kind of remained the same size.
And I think the biggest difference to Garfield is he's like evolved to walk on 2 legs. Like he's much more cat-like in the old version. And now he's a little more cartoony. But But yeah, it is interesting. Certainly, I just again I don't.
Yeah,
Garfield again is not smart humor. It's not political humor. It's just approachable humor.
yeah,
And the other thing too about Garfield that I think doesn't maybe Peanuts is the only good example that I can think of this, where it's been around for a long time and there are tons of strips, but we all remember it for the few things of it that became popular, and we don't remember the day to day of it. At least I don't. Where the I hate Mondays and I eat lasagna and John's an idiot, and I sometimes forget what the day to day comic was like, which I would say was two things. One, it was very good again at that setup punchline, hit them with the joke at the end format.
yeah,
But also two, for my money, Garfield is a comic that has changed a lot over the years, more so than some of these other ones we've discussed. Not just in terms of art style, as we saw, but in terms of the feeling of the humor, the type of humor, not even necessarily the joke structure, but just sort of the humor where it was a little more lighthearted and then it became a little more cynical as time went on, and I just think it's really interesting.
yeah. It's definitely it's a comic that's truly evolved over time, like you said, and also it's a comic strip of perspective. You're always seeing things. It does a really great job of letting you see different situations from different characters' viewpoints. I guess the essential Garfield's. It's always something that it'll show you Garfield's point of view. It'll show you John's point of view in an equal way. That's really cool. And you can kind of side with John or you can side with Garfield about any situation that happens to go on in the strip.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, it's kind of like where Dilbert we said was the ultimate everyman, and everybody around him is kind of just crazy. I think that in this instance with Garfield, you can make an argument for each one of them, Garfield, John, or Odie, for being the everyman.
Mm-hmm.
Like which one of them is really like they kind of all are. That's kind of the answer. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's also they contrast each other in many different ways while also complementing each other. So that's what the interesting thing about Garfield I always found. Another interesting thing, and we talked about this before the show, is the Garfield minus Garfield web generator.
Yes.
That's where I got the idea for like just seeing things from a different perspective in terms of Garfield. It's the Garfield, for those of you who don't know out there, the Garfield minus Garfield web generator will generate random comics of of the Garfield comic strip, and it just but without Garfield in it. Simple as that. They just take Garfield out. They take out the things that he says. So most of the time it's just John looking extremely depressed.
He essentially
and
is like
insane.
a crazy person.
He's pretty much like a manic crazy person because he kind of just appears and
reacts to things that aren't there.
yeah, he's reacting to an invisible Garfield.
It's pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah, and it really does help you see the comic in a completely different way.
It really does. It really does. Honestly, I'd like to see Garfield minus everyone else and see what Garfield does by himself, because you don't really, when you read it, you don't see the characters as individuals. You sort of see the thing as a collective.
Them reacting. The whole comic is just them reacting against each other.
Well, that's exactly
more than
it.
against situations. Yeah,
and that's to be honest, it's a very simple art style. I mean, it's usually just them talking to one another. It's a very conversational type of humor. Yeah, Garfield minus Garfield is pretty great. I'd recommend subscribing. Yeah, you know what?
I think that's a big credit to its success, is that it takes such a very simple concept and really stretches it and pulls a lot of punches.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Garfield works in the same way Caddyshack or The Odd Couple works, where you just have these goofball characters who play off one another so well. And these are characters you really know and understand, and you know what Garfield's about, and you know what John's about, and you know what Odie's about, and some of the ancillary characters. But I just think, what is so timeless about it is it's like the stand-up comedy of comic strips, where you're sort of just presenting this humor without sets and without plot and without scenery and without flashy yikes things like you get in Beetle Bailey, where they're scrambling off cliffs and holding onto tree branches while they fall, kind of stuff. It's just like it. I swear you could probably take Garfield jokes and put them out as tweets and they'd still be funny, because it's just written funny.
Yeah,
it's not about the art. It's not about the comic.
A lot of wit, a lot of observational humor.
It's
really a lot like the It's like the Seinfeld of comic
I think
strips
that is
in a lot of ways.
It is a comic strip about nothing. I think that is a very good way to put it. And I think that lends a bit to its success because it's very approachable in that respect, where you get the characters right away. Dilbert, it takes you a while to really figure out what's going on, I will admit. You really have to know the comic and know the characters, otherwise it can be a little off-putting. Garfield, boom, you get it. Fat lazy cat, loves lasagna, John's uptight, loves
Mondays.
Everything. It's very instinctual. And I think that's why you can make so many movies and TV shows and all this stuff about it, because it's a very universal concept.
Mm-hmm. I always wondered why it was Garfield that hated Mondays. I always felt like John should be the one hating Mondays, because he's the one that has a job and has to get up on Mondays and go to work. But on all the T-shirts and coffee mugs, it's Garfield saying, "I hate Mondays." I don't know, but I think perhaps the most interesting conversation that I've had about Garfield entailed the looking at Garfield from the view of a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how each one of them represents the three levels of consciousness in Freudian psychology. So you have the id, you have the ego, and you have the superego. And I forget which one does which thing, but like Odie is the most primal one. So he's like whichever one is the most primal of all three. I think it's the id is the one that's like your base level. Like, I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to do what I have to do, like that thing. And then like John is a level below that, and like Garfield is like really cunning. So he's like I guess it's the super ego, or whichever one is like the one that's like more like evolved intelligence. So yeah, that's interesting, is looking at it from that point of view. And I know that little comparison thing it gets thrown around a lot in literature about Freudian psychology and stuff. But yeah, Garfield. Another really cool thing about Garfield, they published I'm not sure if it was officially published or if it was like some guy online published a cartoon strip. It was I think a 3-strip series, and it was Garfield. It was like Garfield was trapped in the house with nobody there, and then it turned out like he had dreamt up John.
Oh, I vaguely
Odie,
remember that. Yeah,
and like he was actually just an abandoned cat living in an abandoned house. And then he realized like he was slowly starving to death and starting to go insane, and that's why he imagined up this this world.
Yeah,
that was a pretty creepy one. I remember that being very unsettling, that comic strip. I don't think it was official. I think it was like some fan made it, but it was like really unsettling.
Oh, you know what? Actually, it is an official comic strip. Believe it or not, 1 week before Halloween 1989, it depicts Garfield awakening in a future in which the house is abandoned and he no longer exists. It's not meant to be humorous.
Right. I remember that was the stark difference, is that it was not
Jim Davis,
not a funny Garfield. It was a really creepy Garfield.
Jim Davis said, quote, During a writing session for Halloween, I got the idea for this decidedly different series of strips. I wanted to scare people, and what do people fear most while being alone? We carried out the concept to its logical conclusion and got a lot of responses from the readers. Reaction ranged from right on to, this isn't a trend, is it? Very interesting.
And I think they resolved it in the end with it being like a dream. Like Garfield ate some bad lasagna and then dreamt up this whole scenario, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so glad that I'm back with John and Odie," and like he was more appreciative of them and all that. So it had a happy ending, but it was for the time it was very, very unsettling to read.
Absolutely. But, I know a lot of people give Garfield crap for being crap or being, cheap humor or being light or whatever, but I rep for Garfield. I do think it's funny. I think some of the ancillary stuff isn't very funny, like some of the movies and some of the television shows. I don't think all of that, we're focused on the comic here, and I think no comic is funny every single week, but I think the body of work behind Garfield really, to me, stands the test of time, is very universal, and is funny. And I'll we'll leave Garfield with one fun fact. Do you know why Garfield likes lasagna?
Was it the creator's favorite food?
No.
No, it wasn't Jim Davis's favorite food.
Well, it might be. That's not the reason Wikipedia gives.
Why? Why does he like lasagna? He knew how to draw lasagna?
I'm learning so much about the comic strips. Garfield was born in the kitchen of an Italian restaurant and immediately ate all the pasta and lasagna in sight, thus developing his love and obsession for lasagna and pizza.
Very good. Yeah, he does like pizza, too. That's another...
all Italian things.
Another cat that he likes. Another cat food that he enjoys. All right.
Yeah, cool.
How about that?
I'm all about the Garfield. Garfield also had a video game. Several video games.
Really?
Yeah, let's see. What's
I believe that. Recent? I believe that more than I believe the Dilbert.
Yeah, there's Garfield Big Fat Hairy Deal. There's Garfield Caught in the Act. There's Garfield's Nightmare, Garfield Labyrinth. On PlayStation 2, there was Garfield and Garfield 2. There was the Garfield Lasagna World Tour.
Wow.
And mobile games including Garfield's Diner and Garfield's Zombie Defense. So there you go. All
right.
Matt, we're out of time.
We're out of time?
We're out of time.
Wow.
I know.
What a show.
I know. Honestly, I love when we have these
we'll have to do this again
really
sometime.
Intense discussions.
Yeah.
That's what I like about the shows. We do a lot of different formats, and sometimes we do the rapid fire where we're just hitting stuff quick, but this was sort of a real sort of intellectual sort of thought, and I think we really pointed out some interesting things about some comic strips. Were there any strips you wanted to talk about we didn't get to? I should offer to suggest, because there were a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Peanuts would have been great. Yeah. But there's way too much to unpack there.
Yeah.
We could probably do a whole show on that. And that was really it. I think it was just Peanuts. Zits, maybe.
Yeah, Zits
had some potential.
Zits.
That is a pretty interesting backstory.
I used to read Hagar the Horrible a lot.
Hagar the Horrible I read.
That was a good one. For better or worse.
Curtis was all right.
High and Lois. There's Blondie.
Blondie was good.
There's the what else? I mean, there are just so many.
Kathy, wasn't there a Kathy? One called Kathy?
Kathy and Ziggy, which I don't know. Ziggy is another single panel, but I think it counts. There's Marmaduke. There's Doonesbury. There's Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and Hobbes.
There's a bit of an obscure one that I'm like a super fan of, which is Foxtrot. I don't know if you've ever read Foxtrot.
No, I thought you were going to say a different obscure one that I'm a fan of.
Well, go ahead.
Almost the same one.
Which one?
Is Slylock Fox.
I do remember that.
Do you remember that one?
Yes.
That was my favorite. All-time favorite growing up. Yes,
wow.
I used to love them. Now, I just recently actually went back and looked at some of because it was basically a puzzle for those in the audience who don't know.
Well, it was more for kids.
It was for kids, yeah, and it really was for kids because I went back recently and I'm like, oh my god,
it's so easy.
Are you kidding me? Yeah, I thought it would still be because it was super challenging when I was like 6, but
and now you have a college degree and it's pretty easy.
Yeah,
I would. And to be honest, these days I actually read a ton of web comics. I'm actually a big fan. There's so much good stuff. I would love. I don't know about next time, but I would love at some point to do an episode on web comics.
That would be
only because
I'd be up for that.
There's
web
some
comics
that
are pretty good.
I look forward to every single day that are just so funny, that I enjoy a lot. But Matt, No more talking about comics. We've got to get to our questions, and we've got to
Yeah.
start with last week's question. Now, if you remember last week, we did our red, white, and blue episode, and we talked about all sorts of things, red, white, and blue. And you posed the question to the audience, if you were to add one color to the American flag, which would you add, and what would it symbolize? As you know, red, white, and blue have symbolized different things. What color would you add? Matt, I'm going to have you go first. What color would you add to the American flag?
Well, this is an easy one. So I would take my American flag and I would add the color green to it.
Okay.
Green, of course, having a dual symbolism. It would symbolize our enormous wealth as a nation and our currency, the greenback, and would also symbolize the environment and our compelling duty as citizens of the world to take care of it. And I would make that. I would take that green and I would change the design of the flag by putting a big check mark right in the middle of it.
Big green check mark?
A big green check mark.
Like, okay, America.
Right in the middle of the flag, because
Gotcha.
we are always correct and can do no wrong.
Wow. That is
my solution.
That's bold. That's bold. Wow. I think mine's interesting. I don't know. I would add black, believe it or not.
Okay.
I would add the color black. Black symbolizing many things. One, symbolizing the pure strength of America. No other color than black, I think, can really handle that. Black, of course, being the absence of color, I think represents the enormous tragedies of the past, but that also America has been able to overcome. Black representing space, which has been conquered by America, by the way, and representing our
space.
Black being, again, the absence of color, represents our unimaginable future, which we boldly enter. And what would I do with the color? I would add a single black stripe at the bottom. In the same way you have your star your bars, as they call it. A big black check mark would be kind of terrifying.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that.
I would do my little stripe at the bottom, just as a reminder of the darkness of the past, but also the empty void that is the future successes of us as a nation.
It would also represent the 14th colony, which is the moon.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. America owns space, and we will not let. We should just put a big picture of the moon.
Space is ours.
Space is ours, man. We just.
Ours.
I think we just.
Sorry, Russia.
Took Pluto.
Sorry, China.
I think we own Pluto now.
Yeah. It's ours.
It is. Are you telling
All
that?
for
It
us.
is ours. All right. We have a new question this week about comic strips, and it goes like this: what are the best and worst comic strip mashups you can think of? So when we say mashup, we want you to combine two comic strips together in a great combination and in a really terrible combination. Do you think Spider-Man should visit Beetle Bailey? Do you think the Family Circus kids should really freak out Kathy? I don't know. That's for you to decide at home. We want to know your opinions, the good and the bad. Goldilocks Show on Twitter. Tweet at us. Let us know your answer to this week's question. Of course, feedback on the show in general. What you like, what you don't like, why you're listening, why you're not listening. We want to hear it all, of course. And I want to remind everybody, GoldilocksShow.com is the website. And SoundCloud.com/GoldilocksShow is one of the best ways to subscribe and listen to the show as well. And, of course, we're in all the popular spots you can get podcasts as well. Matt, anything else you'd like to leave the fans with before we conclude this evening?
Just keep enjoying those Sunday comics. You know, there's always a place for them.
I was told I am an 87-year-old man because I call it the Sunday Funnies.
The Sunday Funnies. I think there's always a place for that. It's just a different place than the web comics, but both of them are good, and both of them deserve your own willingness to check them out.
I think that's a good way to put it.
That's it.
That is it. Well, thanks all of you for joining us. I'm Sean. He's Matt. We'll be back next time with a new episode of the Goldilocks Zone. But until then, good night.